Story 1. The Haunted Photo Booth. Part 1. The Fair at Dusk. The fog had rolled in from the North Sea before sunset, thick and strange, swallowing the lights of the Whitby Regatta before the music even began. The sound of the carousel drifted through the grey mist in broken notes, distorted by distance. Felix Warren shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets and followed his friends toward the pier, the scent of fried dough and salt water clinging to the cold air. Miles led the way, his sneakers squeaking on the slick boards. Sophie and Nora trailed behind, laughing softly about a fortune-teller's booth they had just passed. A woman in a sequined shawl who would warn Sophie of a shadow man watching her shoulder. They'd all laughed, though Felix had noticed the woman never blinked once. "Come on, you're walking like an old man," Miles called back, turning to grin at him. The fog around his head glowed faintly orange under the string lights, like a halo about to burn out. Felix forced a smile. "I'm pacing myself. You know, cardio." He wasn't in the mood for jokes. Something about tonight felt wrong, not frightening exactly, just off. The way the sea sounded too far away, the way the fairground lights seemed suspended in nothingness, each bulb an island. Every sound felt swallowed, dulled. They wandered past food stalls and game booths until the path thinned to a narrow lane behind the rides. The crowd noise faded. A few meters ahead, half hidden in fog, stood a battered structure that didn't belong to the modern fair. A squat metal photo booth with peeling paint, its front glass cracked like a spider web. "Old school selfie machine," Miles said. "Let's do it." Sophie wrinkled her nose. "It looks ancient. Like Cold War old." Nora brushed her blonde hair behind her ear and stepped closer, intrigued. "It's kind of cute. Retro." Felix joined them, squinting at the sign above the slot. The letters were faded, rust bleeding into the metal. "Photo time, 3 shots for 50p. Someone had scratched through the price and scrolled, "Still works" in permanent marker beneath. The booth gave off a faint electric hum, though no power cord was visible. "Bet it's just here for atmosphere," Sophie said, stepping back. Like one of those haunted fair props. But Miles had already ducked inside, dragging the curtain shut behind him. "Let's see if it eats my soul or just my money." A mechanical click sounded, followed by 3 bright flashes that cut through the fog. Miles stepped out a moment later, waving a photo strip still warm from the slot. "See? Normal. I'm still beautiful." The others leaned in to look. The photos were grainy but harmless, Miles grinning, sticking out his tongue, throwing up a peace sign. Felix smiled despite himself. "Okay, fine. We'll all take one." They crowded inside, Felix on the stool, Sophie perched beside him, Miles leaning over the back, Nora squeezing in by the curtain. The booth smelled faintly of damp metal and ozone, like the inside of an old computer. Sophie pressed the red button. The first flash came. Then another. And another. 3 flashes. They spilled out laughing, blinking spots from their eyes. The strip slid out with a mechanical whir. Felix caught it. The first 3 frames were what they expected. Distorted smiles, wide eyes, blurry laughter. But the 4th frame. There wasn't supposed to be a 4th. The strip had 4 boxes. And in the last one, behind Nora's shoulder, stood a man. Felix stared at it, his grin fading. The man's face was long and colorless, his eyes hollow black pits, mouth slack open as if mid-breath. One hand clutched what looked like a knife, the metal glinting dull gray. "Is that?" Sophie began. "Don't," Nora said quickly, voice cracking. Miles grabbed the strip, squinting. Probably someone in the background. Long exposure or something. There was no background, Felix muttered. "It's solid wall back there." They looked at the booth. The curtain fluttered slightly, though no breeze stirred. Miles snorted, trying to cut the tension. "It's just an overlay. Old booths used to double expose stuff. Like ghosts for tourists." Nora wasn't convinced. She rubbed her arms. "Why would it print 4? It says 3. Maybe bonus shot," Sophie said weakly, but her eyes stayed fixed on the man's shape. The knife seemed to glint differently now, as if light passed through it wrong. A vendor's voice startled them, an older man emerging from the mist, his coat dusted with rain. "You kids done there?" Felix turned. "Does this thing even work?" It printed 4 photos. The man frowned. "We don't have any booth like that. The fair hasn't used film once in years." Miles gestured to it. "It's right there." But when they turned back, the booth looked darker somehow, less distinct in the fog. The vendor peered toward it, shook his head, and walked off muttering, "Not our equipment. Some prank, maybe." A silence followed, heavier than before. "Let's just go," Nora said finally. "Please." Felix tucked the strip into his pocket, though he didn't know why. It felt wrong to leave it. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that 4th frame, the man's face leering behind Nora's. He told himself it was a reflection, a trick of the light, but the thought kept circling back. The vendor hadn't seen the booth. He'd looked straight at it and seen nothing. At 1 a.m., Felix's phone buzzed. A message from Nora. "Can't sleep. That photo is so creepy." He typed back. "Delete it. It's nothing." The reply came immediately. "I tried. My phone won't let me. Every time I do, it crashes." Felix frowned, sitting up. "Turn it off." Then, "I did." Another message followed, seconds later. "He's in my dreams." The man from the photo. Standing in the hallway. Felix's stomach turned cold. He tried to type, but another message appeared before he could. "Don't look at the photo again. Please." Then her chat icon went grey. He sat there in the dark, the faint click of his wall clock marking each second louder than the last. From somewhere outside, faint and impossible, came a sound like the shutter of an old camera. One click. Then another. He stared at the window, the night beyond thick with fog, his reflection barely visible. The 3rd click came from closer. Right behind him. Partook vanishing lights. By morning, Whitby had turned grey and silent. The sea mist hung over the rooftops like smoke that refused to rise. Felix hadn't slept. He'd stayed awake through the dim hours, replaying Nora's messages until the words blurred, each one echoing in the static of his mind. When he finally checked her profile again, her phone was still offline. His mother called him downstairs for breakfast, but the smell of toast made him sick. He told her he was tired, still full from last night's fair food. She didn't press. Parents rarely noticed when you weren't quite yourself. They mistook silence for growing up. By 10, his phone buzzed again. "Miles. You seen Nora this morning?" Felix hesitated. "No. She texted me weird stuff last night. Said she couldn't sleep." Miles replied. "She didn't show for school." Sophie's freaking out. Felix's heart sunk. He checked the group chat. Sophie's messages flooded the feed. Nora's parents haven't heard from her. Cops might come. Someone said they saw her walking by the pier at midnight. Midnight. That was about the time Felix had heard the shutter clicks. He threw on a jacket and headed into the fog. Whitby in daylight looked wrong, its narrow streets washed out and colorless, as if the sun had forgotten to wake up. The fairgrounds were still half-assembled. Workers moving through the mist, taking down tents and lights. The music from the rides had stopped. The laughter and noise from last night seemed unreal now, like a dream he couldn't shake. He found Miles and Sophie near the pier. Miles's hood was up, his eyes red-rimmed. Sophie stood by the railing, phone in hand, staring at the black water below. "She didn't go home," Miles said quietly. "Her mum called the police this morning. They think she might have gone walking after the fair. Maybe to meet someone." Felix felt the words scrape through him. Or maybe, he stopped himself. It sounded insane even in his head. "Maybe what?" Sophie asked. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo strip. The edges were bent from being clutched all night. He handed it over. Miles frowned. You still have that thing. Sophie took it, and her face went pale. God, it's worse in daylight. The figure behind Nora looked sharper now. The man's face seemed more defined, as though the fog inside the booth had thinned. His hollow eyes seemed to meet hers, the knife glinting in clearer detail. There's no reflection, Felix said quietly. The booth's walls are solid. He couldn't have been there. Miles rubbed his jaw, unease creeping into his tone. Okay, but even if that's true, why would it matter? It's just a photo. Felix met his gaze. She said she saw him in her dreams. Then she vanished. The air seemed to thicken between them. Sophie looked up from the photo. Felix, where did you put the booth? Like, where exactly? Back behind the rides, near the edge of the lot. Miles frowned. That area's empty now. They walked there anyway. The fog grew heavier the closer they got, muffling sound, dulling color. The fairground thinned to an open stretch of mud and gravel, scattered with discarded cups and paper ribbons. The ground where the booth had stood was bare. Only a square of darker earth remained, damp and sunken, as if something heavy had been lifted hours ago. It's gone, Sophie whispered. Someone moved it, Miles said, too quickly, as though saying it could make it true. Felix crouched, touching the soil. It was cold, almost wet. But underneath, the mud was dry. Whatever had been there hadn't been moved recently. It had vanished. He stood, scanning the fog. Maybe it was never really here. Miles frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Felix didn't answer. His mind replayed the vendor's face from last night. The way the man had looked straight at the booth and seen nothing. Maybe the booth wasn't part of the fair at all. Maybe it came when it wanted. That evening, Felix couldn't focus on anything. Police cars had come to Nora Street. Local news already whispered about another missing teen. Whitby's calm charm curdled into something uneasy. Curtained windows, neighbors avoiding eye contact, fog thicker than usual. Sophie texted him again after dark. Miles says he's going back tonight. To check the fairgrounds. Felix's stomach dropped. That's stupid. Let it go. He says he saw something in the fog. Something moving where the booth was. Felix grabbed his coat. He found them by the shore, half hidden by drifting mist. Miles held a flashlight, sweeping it across the empty field. Sophie stood behind him, arms wrapped around herself. Nothing's here, Felix said, breath visible in the cold. You're both losing it. Miles didn't respond. His beam of light trembled slightly as he pointed it toward the far end of the lot, where something metallic gleamed faintly in the dark. It was the booth. Felix froze. It hadn't been there seconds ago. Sophie gasped. Oh my God! The booth looked worse now. Its paint more blistered, the glass more cracked. Its interior glowed faintly red, though no power line ran near it. Miles took a cautious step forward. Maybe someone's inside. Don't, Felix said sharply. But Miles ignored him. He reached for the curtain. It fluttered open slightly, a pulse of cold air rushing out like the booth exhaled. Inside, there was no stool, no machinery, just darkness. Felix's flashlight flickered. Okay, Miles muttered, forcing a laugh. That's creepy. I'm done. He stepped back, but not before something flashed. A camera shutter sound cutting through the fog. Click. Miles jumped. What the hell? A strip slid from the slot. Felix's chest tightened as he caught it. 4 frames again. The first 3 showed them exactly as they stood. Miles near the curtain, Sophie behind him, Felix holding the light. The 4th frame showed Miles alone. And the man from the first photo stood in front of him now, his hand gripping Miles's throat. The flashlight slipped from Felix's hand. Miles, he whispered. But when he looked up, Miles was gone. Only the booth remained, curtains swaying gently in the fog. They called his name until their voices cracked, but the fog swallowed every echo. The booth stood silent, humming faintly. Felix reached for the curtain once, then stopped. The air around it felt wrong, too still, too dense. The sound of the sea was gone. The world seemed held in its breath. Sophie sobbed, clutching his sleeve. We need to go. They stumbled back toward the road, the fog thinning as they moved. When they reached the main street, Sophie turned one last time. The booth was gone again. Felix didn't sleep that night either. He sat on the edge of his bed, the photo strip spread on his desk under the lamp. The ink shimmered faintly, as if still drying. He thought of Nora's last message, of the shutter clicks, of Miles's hand disappearing into the fog. He picked up the strip and noticed something new. The man in the final frame was grinning now, and behind him, just visible, was Felix's own face in the reflection of the booth's cracked glass. Part 3: The Shutter's Curse. The next evening, the fog returned thicker than before. It rolled in from the sea like a living thing, slow, deliberate, swallowing every sound it touched. The town's lampposts glowed as faint orbs suspended in a wall of grey, their light unable to travel far. Whitby felt smaller that night, claustrophobic, as if the fog had folded the world inward. Felix hadn't gone to school. He couldn't. 2 of his friends were missing, their names whispered in classrooms and over dinner tables, though no one said them too loudly. People were afraid of what the town was becoming. Afraid to admit something unnatural was happening again. The police had visited him that afternoon. They'd asked about the fair, about when he last saw Miles and Nora, about strange behavior. Felix had shown them the photo strip. They took one look and exchanged the kind of glances adults think teenagers can't read, the silent kind that says this is above our pay grade. Then they left, and Felix was alone. As night fell, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You took what wasn't yours. He froze, pulse hammering. The next message followed. Come back. Midnight. Bring the photo. The words sent a chill through his spine. He checked the sender. No name, no profile picture. Just a number that, when dialed, returned the metallic hiss of disconnected static. For the next 3 hours, Felix tried to convince himself not to go. He told himself the police would find them, that maybe Miles and Nora had just run away together, that the photo meant nothing. But the thought of that 4th frame, the knife, the man's grin, the empty booth, gnawed at him like something inside his skull whispering, you know how this ends. You've already seen it. By 11:45, he'd put on his jacket. He took the long way to the fairground, past the pier and through the narrow back lanes where the fog seemed to thicken with each step. His footsteps sounded muffled, swallowed before they could echo. The air reeked faintly of rust and salt. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But something stronger, curiosity, guilt, or whatever bound the living to the haunted, pulled him forward. When he reached the field, the booth was there. It stood alone, glowing faintly through the fog like a lantern someone had forgotten to extinguish. Its cracked paint gleamed wet under the mist. The curtain fluttered slightly, though the air was still. Felix stopped a few feet away. Where are they? He whispered, though the fog devoured his words. The booth didn't answer, but the curtain moved again, as if someone inside had shifted. Felix's breath caught. Slowly, he stepped forward. The booth smelled of damp wood and iron. Up close, he could see fingerprints smeared across the glass. His hand trembled as he reached for the curtain, pausing when his reflection appeared faintly in the metal frame. For a heartbeat, he saw something else standing behind him in that reflection, tall, thin, hollow-eyed. He spun around. Nothing. The booth clicked. The sound was mechanical, old, like an automatic timer winding itself. Inside, a faint red glow pulsed. He didn't remember touching anything. Okay, he muttered to himself. You wanted me here. I'm here. He stepped inside. The curtain fell shut behind him, cutting out the fog. The air changed, colder, thicker, as if he'd stepped underwater. The inside of the booth was larger than before, or maybe just darker. The seat was gone. The corners seemed deeper, shadows stretching farther than they should. The timer clicked again. 3, 2, 1. The flash exploded. Felix blinked, seeing afterimages dance across his vision. The flash wasn't white, it was red, staining everything for a split second. He thought he saw a face in the burst, inches from his own. When his vision cleared, the booth wasn't empty anymore. The man was sitting opposite him. He wasn't a ghost, at least not the transparent kind Felix had imagined. He looked solid, flesh pressed tight over bone, dressed in a butcher's apron that glistened faintly. His eyes were bottomless hollows, his mouth curved into a grin that didn't reach them. "Felix," the man rasped. His voice was wrong, like the grinding of old film reels. "You took what belongs to me." Felix stumbled backward, hitting the wall. What? What do you want?" Another flash. Now the man was closer. Felix's arm burned. He looked down and saw a thin slice across his skin, as if the camera flash itself had cut him. "Every frame," the man whispered, "takes one soul. One memory. One life." The booth began to hum, louder, the air vibrating with static. The walls pulsed faintly, images forming. Nora's terrified face, Miles's wide eyes, hundreds of others overlapping like overlapping negatives. All trapped inside the photos. Felix lunged for the curtain. It didn't move. His hand met resistance, solid glass. The booth was sealed. The flash came again, red and violent. The man reached forward this time, knife glinting. Felix ducked, the blade grazing his shoulder, slicing through his jacket. He kicked at the wall, felt it crack. The flash went off again. Each burst showed the man closer, clearer, sharper. Felix swung wildly, hitting the side panel. Wood splintered. He shoved through, glass cutting his palms as he crawled out into the fog. The booth screamed behind him, a deep, mechanical shriek like a dying engine, and then went silent. Felix ran. He didn't stop until the lights of town shimmered through the mist. His lungs burned, his hands bled. When he looked back, the fog had closed around the fairground completely. The booth was gone. By dawn, the police found him on the steps of a closed cafe, trembling and covered in cuts. He told them everything. They searched the fairground, found tire tracks, broken boards, but no booth. That afternoon, the officers returned something they'd found near the field. A single photo strip. Felix's hands shook as he took it. The first 3 frames were empty. The 4th showed the man's grin again, same hollow eyes, same knife. But this time, the reflection in the booth's cracked glass was missing. Felix's own face was gone. He never returned to Whitby's fairgrounds after that. Nights brought the faint click of a shutter in his dreams, sometimes followed by the smell of rust, sometimes by a flash of red light behind his eyelids. And when he looked into mirrors, sometimes, only for a second, he saw the booth standing quietly in the fog behind him, waiting for another picture. Dash 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 dash. Story 2. The Cursed Vault. Part 1. The House That Shouldn't Breathe. The rain had followed Nathan and Clara Cole for nearly 200 miles. By the time they reached the end of the narrow lane leading into rural Haworth, Yorkshire, the sky was a solid bruise of grey, and their car looked like it had been dragged through a swamp. The duplex, if one could still call it that, stood hunched at the end of the road, its slate roof slick and glistening, its stone walls crawling with ivy like black veins. Nathan killed the engine and sat there a moment, listening to the rain drum against the windshield. "It's got character," he said finally, though it sounded like an apology. Clara laughed softly, hugging her coat tighter. "Character? It's got ghosts." He smiled, but uneasily. She wasn't wrong. The house looked ancient enough to have memories. 2 doors, one bricked over, one half-rotten, faced the gravel path. The windows were blind with grime, and the garden was a tangle of weeds and brambles that reached for their ankles like skeletal fingers. Yet it was cheap, absurdly cheap for Haworth. A fixer-upper, the agent had called it, full of history. History, Nathan had learned, usually meant trouble someone else didn't want to deal with. They stepped inside to the smell of mildew and dust. The air was thick, stagnant, as if it hadn't been breathed in years. Wooden floorboards creaked underfoot. The wallpaper, once cream, had yellowed and curled away from the walls like burnt paper. Still, beneath all that decay, Nathan felt the faint, stupid hope of ownership, the quiet thrill of "this is ours." Clara explored like a cautious archaeologist, brushing cobwebs from the staircase banister. "It's bigger than it looked in the photos," she said, and called her. Nathan tested the light switches. Nothing. The power wasn't on yet. The silence that followed was total, so thick it seemed to hum faintly in his ears. Somewhere beneath them, something creaked. Slowly, like a sigh. They exchanged a glance. "Probably the plumbing," he said quickly. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure. They spent the afternoon unpacking, lighting candles, trying to make the place feel less like a mausoleum. When the rain stopped, a dense mist rolled in across the fields outside. The air grew damp again, carrying a faint metallic smell. From the window, Nathan saw how the fog pressed against the house like it wanted to come in. By evening, Clara had set up her laptop on the kitchen counter, researching local records. "Guess what?" she said. "This house was built by a family called the Rowleys. Lived here till 1987. Then the whole property went to auction after something." "After what?" She frowned. "The article's missing. Just says, property vacated following incident." "Helpful." Nathan smirked. Probably just a leaky roof or a bad tax record. But as he spoke, he noticed the wall near the kitchen door, a long vertical seam hidden under the peeling wallpaper. A doorframe, maybe. He ran his fingers along it. The faint outline of a handle lay beneath the paint. "Clara," he said, "come look at this." She joined him, candle in hand. "Hidden door. Looks like it. Maybe an old pantry or cellar." He pressed his shoulder against it. The door didn't budge. No give, no creak, nothing, like it had been sealed shut from the other side. The candlelight wavered across the wall, revealing faint scratches near the handle, as if someone had tried clawing it open once. "I'll check behind the wallpaper tomorrow," he said, trying to sound casual. But the air suddenly felt colder. Clara shivered. "Let's leave it for now." They went upstairs, leaving the sealed door in darkness. The first night was restless. Nathan dreamed of dripping water and footsteps beneath the floorboards. In the dream, he descended stairs that shouldn't exist, spiraling endlessly downward into blackness until he reached a steel door, humming faintly, warm to the touch. When he tried to open it, someone whispered his name from the other side. He woke gasping. The room was freezing. Clara was still asleep beside him, her breath fogging faintly in the candlelight. He turned his head. The wall across from the bed pulsed once, like something behind it was breathing. Then, nothing. Nathan sat up, heart pounding. "Just the pipes," he whispered. But the words didn't help. They sounded like a lie. Morning came weak and grey. Clara made coffee on a camp stove while Nathan fetched tools from the car. He couldn't shake the image of that sealed door. Curiosity was a curse of its own. Once it took root, it wouldn't leave you alone. By noon, he had stripped the wallpaper away. Beneath it was old oak wood, reinforced with rusted nails. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide this door. The handle was gone, the hole stuffed with wax and sawdust. "Nate," Clara said wearily, "maybe we shouldn't." Just a quick look. He wedged a crowbar into the crack. The wood resisted, groaning as if the house itself disapproved. Then it gave way, splintering open. Dust billowed out, thick and cold, smelling faintly of iron. Behind the door was a stairwell. Narrow, steep, leading down into darkness. A damp draft flowed upward, cool against Nathan's face. He aimed his flashlight into the void. The beam caught brick walls, blackened, slick, uneven. Far below, something metallic gleamed faintly. "See?" he said. "Probably just a wine cellar." Clara frowned. Or a crypt. But Nathan had already started down. The steps creaked under his weight. Each one groaned differently, like a voice struggling through sleep. His light flickered over cobwebs and old plaster until it landed on a steel wall door. It looked industrial, far too modern for the rest of the house, embedded deep into the earth. No handle, no keyhole, just a dial with faded numbers and a slit at the center. "What the hell?" he muttered. Clara's voice echoed faintly from above. "Nate, don't touch it." He reached out anyway, brushing away the dust. A faint symbol was carved into the steel. A circle intersected by 3 lines, almost like a sigil. For a moment, he thought he heard something, a faint tapping from inside. Slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. He froze. Clara's footsteps thundered down the stairs. "What is it?" Nathan stepped back. "It's locked. But there's something in there." "In there?" She stared at him. "Like an animal." "I don't know." His flashlight trembled in his grip. It sounded human. They stood there, breathing hard, listening. Silence. Then, faintly, something scraped along the metal from the inside. That was enough. They backed away, sealing the broken door with a chair wedged beneath the handle. Neither of them spoke for a long time. By evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old property forums, her hands shaking. "Nathan, look at this." She turned the screen toward him. An archived article. Local property linked to disappearance of 3 laborers in 1985. House remains unsold following police investigation. Beneath it was a blurry black and white photo. The same duplex. The same sealed doorway. Nathan swallowed hard. 3 laborers. Renovators, Clara said. They were hired to clear the basement. None of them came back. He stared at the photo. In the corner, partially obscured by shadow, the wall door gleamed faintly, just as it had tonight. Outside, the wind howled against the roof. Somewhere deep in the house, a low metallic groan echoed, like something turning over in its sleep. The vault was awake now, and Nathan knew, with a cold certainty, that opening that door had been the first mistake. Part of the room that writes names. By the second night, the rain had turned savage. It clawed at the roof tiles and bled through the cracks, drumming endlessly on the attic windows. Nathan barely slept. He lay awake listening to the rhythmic groans of the house and the faint, muffled scraping that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards, always beneath. When he rose at dawn, Clara was already at the kitchen table, laptop open, a half-eaten slice of toast abandoned beside her. The bluish light of the screen made her face look hollow. "There's more," she murmured, not looking up. "I dug into the police archives." Nathan poured himself coffee, careful not to speak too quickly. She was in that quiet, obsessive mode he recognized from the early days of their relationship, when she was writing her dissertation and surviving on black tea and stew bonus. "What did you find?" She turned the screen. The property records show that the basement wasn't supposed to exist. The house plans from 1903 stop at the ground floor. No cellar, no foundation chamber. And get this, there was an investigation in the 1970s. Neighbors complained about smells coming from the ground. Smells. Decay. Rot. They sealed it in 1985 after the workmen vanished. Nathan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. And somehow nobody tore the place down. Clara gave a dry laugh. "This is Yorkshire. People ignore ghosts as long as the rent's low." They tried to laugh it off, but the tension lingered like humidity in the air. The sealed door now seemed to hum faintly whenever Nathan passed it, like metal warming in sunlight. By midday, he thought he heard faint whispering, so soft he almost convinced himself it was wine sliding through cracks in the walls. He wanted to be rational, to be pragmatic Nathan again. But reason was eroding, grain by grain. That evening, the power flickered on for the first time. When the ceiling light burst to life, Nathan felt oddly relieved, as if illumination could chase off whatever the darkness was breeding. He cooked pasta on the small electric stove, the hiss of boiling water soothing. Clara read aloud from her notes. Apparently the last owner, a man named Edward Rowley, disappeared around the same time as the workmen. The police called him a suspect, but his body was never found. He was some kind of local historian, obsessed with folk rituals, old graves, things like that. Nathan forked pasta onto her plate. So our charming house used to belong to a cultist. Great. He wasn't a cultist, she said automatically, then paused. Actually, maybe he was. They both laughed, but there was no warmth in it. After dinner, they went upstairs. The storm had finally eased into drizzle. Nathan stood at the window, looking out over the moors. The fog glowed faintly under the porch light, swirling like breath. In the reflection, he saw Clara behind him, pale and sleepless, hugging her own arms. "You still hear it?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "The noises?" She nodded. "Yeah. It's quieter tonight, though." They stood in silence. Then, something sharp and metallic echoed from below, a hollow clang that reverberated through the pipes. They both froze. "Basement," Clara whispered. Nathan grabbed the flashlight. "Stay here." But she followed anyway. The sealed door was trembling when they reached it. The chair Nathan had wedged beneath the handle was quivering, wood scraping against the floor. A rhythmic thumping pulsed from behind the wall, like slow, deliberate knocking. Clara clutched his arm. "It's trying to open." He wanted to tell her that was impossible, that it was vibration from the storm or old plumbing, but the words died on his tongue. The sound was too purposeful. He approached slowly, flashlight trembling. "Who's there?" The knocking stopped. A pause. Then, from deep within the wood, a whisper, low, genderless, like air leaking through a crack. "Names." The word slithered into the silence, so faint that Nathan thought his mind had fabricated it. But Clara heard it too. Her grip on his sleeve tightened. "Nathan," she breathed. It said, "I heard." He backed away, heart hammering. Then the lights went out. For a moment, the house was pitch black. Nathan could only hear Clara's rapid breaths beside him and a faint ringing in his ears. Then, from behind the sealed door, a metallic creak echoed, followed by a slow, dragging sound, like something heavy being moved. He raised the flashlight. The beam flickered on. The door was slightly ajar. A cold draft breathed through the gap, carrying the scent of wet earth and rust. Clara screamed. Nathan seized her hand and bolted up the stairs, slamming the kitchen door behind them. He braced his weight against it, every muscle shaking. Below, the dragging sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse. They barricaded the door with furniture. Nathan checked every window, every lock, until he was sure the house was sealed tight. Clara sat trembling on the couch, clutching her phone. "Should we call the police?" she whispered. "And tell them what? That our basement is whispering names." He regretted the sharpness of his tone immediately. She didn't reply, just stared at the wall as if listening for something. He joined her. Minutes passed. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, 3 knocks. 1, 2, 3. Then silence again. Nathan stood. "I'm going to check." Clara's eyes widened. "You're not. I just want to make sure nothing's open. I'll stay at the door." He took the flashlight again, descending halfway down the stairs. The air grew colder, damp enough that his breath misted. The sealed door, now cracked open about an inch, revealed nothing but blackness beyond. He crouched, shining the light through. A gleam reflected back, metal, faintly wet. Then he saw the jars. Hundreds of them, lining the wall beyond the threshold. Some were empty, others filled with something dark. In the beam's jittering light, he saw names scratched into their lids in spidery handwriting: Edith Rowley, Thomas Kerr, Samuel Bod, and one, sitting closest to the door, freshly labeled in smeared ink. Clara Cole. The flashlight slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. He staggered backward up the stairs, throat raw. Clara, he gasped. Get out of the house. What? Why? Your name. It's written down there, on a jar. But before he could finish, the door behind him slammed shut. He hurled himself against it, shouting her name. When he finally forced it open, she was gone. Only her phone remained on the couch, screen flickering. On it, a new message had appeared. No sender. No number. Just a photo. The image was of the vault door, fully open now, and two new jars on a shelf inside. Nathan Cole. Clara Cole. Both half-filled with something red. He ran. He didn't remember locking the front door, or how he ended up outside in the rain. He only knew the wind was shrieking through the trees and the fog glowed faintly, as if reflecting unseen light. The house loomed behind him, black windows staring. He called her name again and again. The only reply was the faint click of metal from within the walls, rhythmic and patient, like someone tightening a lid. When the police arrived hours later, they found Nathan shivering in the garden, his clothes soaked and eyes unfocused. The officers searched the basement. The vault door was sealed shut again. No jars, no names, no sign of Clara. They thought he was delirious, maybe in shock. Nathan didn't argue. But that night, as he sat in the borrowed guest room of a friend's flat, his phone buzzed. A single text appeared from Clara's number. It contained no words, only an image. A close-up of his own name, written in white chalk on black steel. And below it, a caption in faint, grey font. It writes what it takes. Part 3. The vault opens its mouth. The rain stopped by dawn, but the silence it left behind felt wrong. Not peaceful, expectant. Nathan sat by the kitchen window of his friend Mark's flat, staring at the condensation hallowing his reflection. He hadn't slept. The photo on his phone glowed faintly on the counter beside him. The last message from Clara's number. It writes what it takes. He hadn't opened it again since last night. He couldn't. The detectives had promised to contact him once they'd examined the house, though he could tell from their tone that they didn't believe half his story. The missing wife, the jars, the whispering door, all filed away under trauma-induced hallucination. They told him to rest. Rest. As if anything in him could rest now. By mid-morning, Mark found him pacing the living room, pale and shaking. Nate, you need food, he said gently. You've not eaten since yesterday. I can't, Nathan muttered. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. They said they'd call if they found her. Mark hesitated. They won't, mate. Not today. Nathan swallowed. He knew it too. The police never moved fast unless there was blood to prove urgency. And even then, sometimes they didn't move at all. He pulled out his phone again. The message was still there. The photo. And, he froze. The timestamp had changed. The message now read today, 8:17 a.m. He hadn't touched it. The photo had altered, too. A faint difference. The background behind the jars had shifted, showing a wider shot of the vault wall. Now, dozens of jars lined the shelves, far more than he remembered seeing before. And one, near the bottom, was broken. Cracks spider-webbed across its surface. And in the reflection of that broken glass, Nathan saw something impossible. His own face. Behind him, a hand, thin, grey, clawed, rested on his shoulder. He dropped the phone. It hit the tile, screen cracking down the middle. He left the flat within the hour, ignoring Mark's protests. The police tape at his house barely slowed him down. The key still fit the front lock, though the hinges groaned as if in warning. The house smelled of wet stone and rust. He moved room to room, flashlight trembling. Everything was as he'd left it. The overturned chairs, the scattered mail, the cold bowls of uneaten pasta. Only one thing had changed, the humming. It was louder now, deep, resonant, like a subsonic heartbeat emanating from the floorboards. It pulsed beneath his feet, rhythmic, aware. When he reached the sealed door, he found it standing wide open. No hinges, no latch, just a dark throat gaping into the earth. He stood at the threshold, the beam of his light swallowed whole by the blackness. "Clara," he called. The echo came back strange, too quick, too close, as if something repeated him from just beyond sight. He stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. The air was dense, metallic. He felt it cling to his skin, cold sweat mixing with the scent of old iron and earth. The walls were slick, black paint or something thicker. His light caught the faint glint of writing etched into the surface. Hundreds of names, layered over one another, gouged into the metal with what looked like fingernails. Near the back, the vault door stood half open. The jars glistened inside, perfectly arranged. Each was labeled. Each contained something unspeakably personal. Rings, teeth, locks of hair. And there, on the lowest shelf, was the broken jar from the photo. He crouched before it. Inside lay a single slip of paper, soaked through and curling at the edges. He lifted it gingerly. Words in faded red ink spread across it, smearing under his touch. Every name feeds the mouth. Something stirred behind him. He froze. A whisper rose, low and thick, rolling through the air like wine through a graveyard. "Nathan Cole." He turned. A figure stood in the doorway, a shape of bones and soot, tall enough that its head brushed the ceiling. Its limbs were jointed wrong, like a marionette tangled in its own strings. Where its face should have been was only darkness, and within that darkness, eyes, faintly glowing, hundreds of them, shifting like embers in ash. "Nathan Cole," it repeated, but the voice came from everywhere, the walls, the jars, the floor. He stumbled back, hitting the shelves. A jar toppled and shattered, spilling fragments across the ground. The thing stepped closer, feet making no sound. "Where is she?" he gasped. "What did you do to her?" The eyes blinked, slow as breathing. "She is where you left her." And then, softly, another whisper. "But she is not yours anymore." The wall trembled. Jars rattled. Lids spun loose, releasing thin tendrils of mist that called through the air. Inside the glass, faces began to form. Dozens of them pressed against the inner surfaces, mouths open in silent screams. Clara's face was among them. He reached toward it, choking back a sob. "Clara, I'm here. I'm here." The mist surged out, enveloping his hand. It burned like acid. He screamed, falling backward as the air grew thick and the light in his hand flickered violently. Through the swirling hedge, he saw Clara's mouth moving behind the glass. Not screaming, speaking. "Run!" The vault roared to life. The walls convulsed, steel bending like flesh. The shelves splintered outward, jars exploding in a symphony of glass and howling voices. A black liquid poured from the cracks, reeking of blood and earth. The entity stepped forward, its many eyes burning brighter. "Every name feeds the mouth," it said again. "Now you will feed it, too." Nathan stumbled to the door, clawing his way up the stairs. The air was thick, the floor trembling beneath him as if something massive was waking beneath the foundation. Behind him, the vault gave a final, tearing shriek, the sound of metal splitting, and then everything went white. He woke in daylight, lying on the lawn. The police were everywhere again. Paramedics hovered. Someone shouted orders, but the words didn't reach him. The house behind him was gone. In its place was a crater of blackened earth, smoking faintly, as if fire had burned underground for centuries and only now found release. They said it was a gas explosion. He nodded numbly. He didn't tell them about the voices, or the eyes, or the way, when the medics wheeled him into the ambulance, he saw something glinting under his fingernails, tiny shards of glass, streaked with dark red. 2 days later, Nathan woke in the hospital to find a small jar sitting on his bedside table. It was clean, sealed. A label on the lid read simply, "Nathan Cole." Inside, Floating in clear liquid was his wedding ring. He screamed until the nurses sedated him. When they returned to check, the jar was gone. The following week, Mark received a voicemail. The call came from Nathan's number. All it contained was static, until the very end, when a voice whispered through the interference. It writes what it takes. Now it's writing you. .. Story 3. The Phantom of Hollow Creek. Part 1. The Last Passenger. The roads outside York were empty that night, slick with rain and silvered by the headlights of Owen Baxter's bus. The Vipers moved in steady rhythm, thunk, 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 pushing streaks of water across the windshield. Beyond the glass lay miles of moorland swallowed in darkness. It was the kind of night that made even the diesel hum sound lonely. Owen liked the late shift. No passengers complaining about stops, no chatter. Just the road, the rain, and the soft wheeze of the bus's brakes at each deserted station. But that night, the 12th of November, 2016, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was pacing his headlights. Scout, his old collie, waited at home in their tiny semi-detached on the outskirts of a combe. Owen pictured the dog curled up by the heater, the house warm, safe, ordinary. That thought grounded him. It had to, because for the past hour, the mist had thickened into something almost solid, low, dense, crawling along the ground in pale ribbons. The road markings disappeared. The moors blurred into endless white. He slowed, easing the bus into first gear. The fog swirled like breath. The digital clock above the dashboard blinked 11:48 p.m. Almost done, he muttered to himself, voice rasping. Last run. There was only one passenger left. Walter. Walter sat halfway down the bus, wearing a raincoat to sizes too big and a flat cap stained dark from drizzle. He had the waxy, translucent skin of a man older than his memory. The clipboard in Owen's log said he was being dropped off near Hollow Creek, a stop that hadn't been serviced in years. But Walter had a printed ticket and the right fare, so Owen hadn't argued. Every few minutes, the old man mumbled to himself, a mix of words and fragments that sounded like prayers or warnings. They rise from the trees, you'll see them, same as I did. Owen pretended not to hear. There was something too fragile about the man's voice, too far gone to challenge. The fog pressed closer to the glass. The headlights struggled, beams swallowed by the white. Nearly there, Walter, he said, forcing cheer. Hollow Creek's up ahead. Yeah. Walter turned his head, slow as an old clock's hand. His eyes caught the dashboard glow. Milky, unfocused, yet sharp enough to make Owen's stomach tighten. Don't stop, Walter said. They wait there. Owen gave a nervous laugh. Who waits? The ones who can't leave. The Viper squealed. The bus rumbled onward. 10 minutes later, the GPS chirped. Next stop, Hollow Creek. The words felt wrong. Hollow Creek had been removed from his route map months ago. He hadn't driven that far north since the floods washed out the bridge. But here the screen glowed green, arrow pointing left toward a narrow road choked with fog. Bloody technology, he muttered. Walter's voice floated from behind him. You can't stop what remembers you. The words hit harder than they should have. Owen's fingers tightened on the wheel. He slowed, the tires crunching over wet gravel. The road narrowed, bending between skeletal birch trees that loomed like ribs. The mist pulsed, glowing faintly under the headlights. Then, the radio fist. Static. He smacked the dashboard. Come on. A sharp crack erupted through the speakers. A sound like something alive being torn. Then a voice, faint and childlike, whispered through the interference. Don't look back. Owen froze. The radio hissed again, then went silent. Walter began humming in the back seat. A tune that might have been a lullaby. The kind mothers sing to calm a baby during storms. When Owen pulled to a stop at Hollow Creek, the bus engine shuddered as if resisting. The fog outside was so thick he couldn't see the road signs, or anything at all. Here we are, he said finally, turning to face Walter. End of the line. The seat was empty. He blinked. The coat, the cap, the man, gone. Only a faint damp patch on the upholstery remained, glistening under the cabin light. Walter. Owen stood, heart pounding. Sir? You can't just. Something scraped along the bus roof. A slow, deliberate drag. Metal against metal. Owen froze, breath caught in his throat. The scraping moved toward the front, stopping above his head. Then, 3 heavy thuds, like something crawling, repositioning itself. He turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt alive. He could hear the wind between the trees, the tick of the cooling radiator, and somewhere, close, a low, animal growl. He looked toward the windshield. A shadow moved in the fog. At first, he thought it was a tree swaying. Then the shape straightened, impossibly tall. Its outline humanoid but wrong. The legs were jointed backward. The arms were too long, the fingers ending in hooked points that dragged against the bus's metal siding, making that same scraping sound. Its head tilted, the movement smooth and deliberate. The fog shifted around it, not concealing but clinging, as if the mist itself belonged to it. Owen's instinct screamed, get out now. He stumbled backward, fumbling for the door lever. The hiss of the pneumatic system filled the cabin, and the front doors yawned open. Cold air flooded in, carrying the scent of wet bark and rot. The thing moved closer, each step silent but heavy enough to make the bus tremble. Owen's hand found his phone. No signal, just a blinking emergency icon. He pressed the horn. The sound blared once, then died mid-note, as if strangled. The lights flickered. Through the windshield, the figure leaned forward, placing one clawed hand against the glass. Its face, or what passed for one, was a smooth void, rippling faintly like water disturbed. Owen stumbled down the aisle, heart racing. He grabbed the emergency hammer near the back exit. The fog outside was thicker there, glowing faintly blue. When he turned back, the front windshield was empty. Gone. He held his breath. The silence roared in his ears. Then the driver's side mirror twisted, slow and deliberate, as if something outside had grabbed it. The glass reflected not the bus but a hollow stretch of road disappearing into darkness. No fog. No trees. Just an empty black void stretching forever. Owen dropped the hammer. It hit the floor with a dull clang. He turned toward the aisle and saw Walter again. The old man was sitting 2 rows away, cap in his hands, head bowed. You stopped, he said softly. You shouldn't have. Owen's voice broke. What are you talking about? What the hell is going on? Walter looked up, and for the first time, Owen saw the truth in his face. It wasn't age, it was decay. Skin too thin, eyes clouded not with cataracts but with ash. They rise from the trees, Walter said, his voice like wine through dry leaves. They feed on what forgets. Owen staggered back. You're not real. Walter smiled faintly, teeth grey. Neither is the road. The fog surged in through the open doors, filling the bus. Owen ran for the controls, slamming the lever to shut them, but it was too late. The mist swallowed him whole, heavy and cold and full of whispers. He felt hands brushing his jacket, cold fingers tracing his name. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Owen gasped, coughing. The bus engine sputtered back to life. The fog had thinned to a light mist. The headlights shone clear on the wet road again. The seats behind him were empty. The clock read 12:07 a.m. Walter was nowhere. The air smelled faintly of pine and iron. He drove the rest of the route in silence, every nerve tight. When he finally parked at the depot, the supervisor barely glanced at him before waving him off. Rough night. Owen nodded weakly. Something like that. When he checked the passenger manifest before clocking out, he found Walter's ticket still in the drawer, unsent, unpaid. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., Hollow Creek. His hands shook. The ticket wasn't paper anymore. It was damp, the ink smeared into faint grey streaks, like fingerprints pressed in fog. Part 2. The return route. Owen told himself it was exhaustion, that the fog, the sounds, even the vanishing passenger were just tricks of an overtired mind. But as dawn light crept over York's rooftops, he couldn't shake the chill that had settled in his bones. He fed Scout, brewed coffee strong enough to burn, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the damn ticket he'd brought home in his jacket pocket. The ink had bled into nothing overnight. Just a faint grey smudge in the shape of a name that wasn't there anymore. Every few minutes, he thought he heard something soft in the garden. Not footsteps exactly, but movement, like something brushing against the fence boards. Each time he looked, nothing, just mist lingering over the grass. He told himself to sleep. Instead, he called the depot. "Baxter," said the dispatcher's voice, tired and nasal. "You off shift today?" "I know," Owen said. Did we ever run the Hollow Creek stop again? It came up on my route last night." A pause. The faint scratch of paperwork. "Hollow Creek's been off the system 3 years now. Bridge washed out." "Why?" "Just, the GPS pinged it." "Well, that's a glitch, mate. Happens all the time. System's older than half the fleet. Right?" Owen muttered. "Yeah. A glitch." But when he hung up, he noticed something impossible. The digital clock on the microwave blinked 11:48 p.m. It wasn't even noon yet. That afternoon, Owen tried walking it off. He followed the narrow road behind his estate, where fields gave way to sparse woodland. The November sun was low, pale, without warmth. Each step crunched frost. He tried to focus on normal things. Scout chasing crows, the smell of diesel from the distant air road. But everything felt hollowed out, drained of sound. Halfway along the path, he stopped dead. A paper bus ticket lay in the dirt. Wet, smudged, folded once down the middle. He picked it up. The logo on top was old, Northern Transit's design from the early 2000s. The stop read, Hollow Creek. He turned it over. On the back, in faint pencil scrawl, were 2 words. "They wait." His stomach dropped. The handwriting was his. He didn't remember writing it. That night, the dreams came. He was back on the bus. The road glowed white through the fog, the headlights carving tunnels in the mist. The seats behind him were full, but the passengers were wrong. They didn't move. Their skin was grey and stretched, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in perfect silence. He tried to speak, but no sound came. The radio hissed. A child's voice whispered again, "Don't look back." He woke to Scout barking wildly, claws scraping the door. When he opened it, the dog bolted into the garden, growling at the fence. The fog was thick again, pooling low along the ground. Something flickered near the hedge, a glimmer of movement too tall to be human. "Hey!" Owen shouted, voice shaking. "Who's there?" The fog stirred. Then came the scraping sound, the same one from the bus roof, slow and deliberate, metal against metal. Scout whimpered and ran back inside. Owen locked the door. Outside, the scraping continued for a long time. He didn't go to work the next day. He didn't call in either. He couldn't explain it, but something about that stretch of road, that night, still felt unfinished, like a story cut off mid-sentence. By afternoon, curiosity outweighed fear. He packed Scout into the car and drove north, the same direction the route had taken him. The A64 was nearly empty. Clouds hung low over the moors, pressing down on the horizon like a lid. After an hour, he saw the faded sign, Hollow Creek 2 miles. His hands clenched the wheel. He almost turned back, but a strange pull kept him driving. The road narrowed, flanked by thin birches and dry stone walls. The bridge ahead was gone, just as the dispatcher said, replaced by a steel barricade and a weather-beaten council notice, road closed, unsafe structure. But beyond it, a faint track veered off into the trees. The same kind of track his bus must have taken. He parked on the verge, heart hammering. Scout whined from the passenger seat. Just a look, Owen murmured. Then we're done. The woods swallowed him within 50 steps. The air was colder here, the kind that gnaws through jackets. The trees grew close together, their trunks slick with moss, roots clutching the ground like bones. He followed the faint dirt path downhill until it opened into a clearing. And there it was. The bus, half buried in mud, tilted at an angle, its windows shattered and roof sagging under years of decay. Its license plate was gone, the paint bleached pale. But Owen knew it instantly. The number printed above the windshield, 94A York Hollow Creek. He approached slowly, every sense screaming that this wasn't possible. The bus door hung open. The interior smelled of rot and damp leather. Rain pooled in the aisle. He climbed inside. The seats were torn, the floor littered with leaves. His flashlight caught something carved into the dashboard. Don't look back. His breath misted in the cold. No, 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 that's not. A whisper cut him off. Low, soft, familiar. Driver. He turned. Walter sat in the same seat as before. Had tilted low, coat dripping, eyes milky white. You came back, the old man said. Owen stumbled backward, hitting the fare box. You're dead. Walter smiled faintly. So are they. The windows darkened. The fog outside pressed closer, flattening against the glass like liquid. Shapes moved within it, tall, jointed, slow. They rise from the trees, Walter whispered again. And now they've seen you. Something heavy struck the roof. Then the side of the bus. The walls shuddered. Owen bolted down the aisle, tripping over the steps as he fled into the open air. The fog chased him like smoke, curling around his ankles, whispering in voices that weren't human. He didn't stop running until he reached the barricade. When he finally dared to look back, the clearing was empty. No bus. No fog. Just silent woods. That night, back home, he found fresh mud smeared across his doorstep. His shoes were clean. He checked the clock. 11:47 p.m. Scout wouldn't stop growling. The lights flickered. And faintly, through the static hiss of his radio, a voice emerged. His own. Next stop. Hollow Creek. Part 3. They rise from the trees. By morning, Owen's house felt wrong. Every sound seemed too close, every shadow slightly misshapen. The kettle's whistle startled him so violently that hot water sloshed over his hands. The burn didn't register. He just stood there, watching the steam coil toward the ceiling, imagining it turning grey and heavy like the fog that had followed him home. Scout paced the kitchen, whining. When Owen glanced at the window, he saw fresh condensation clouding the glass from the outside. Finger trails dragged downward, 5 parallel marks like claws. He whispered, "It's still here." The phone rang, slicing through the silence. He flinched so hard the mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the tile. It was the bus depot. He hesitated before answering. Baxter speaking. "Where the hell were you been, mate?" said the dispatcher. "You're 2 nights behind. The office's been trying to reach you." Owen swallowed. "Something's wrong. That route. You need to remove Hollow Creek permanently." "I mean it. What are you on about? Hollow Creek's been off the roster since 2013. You're not even scheduled near that side of the moor." "I drove it," Owen said. 2 nights ago. The GPS loaded it in." There was a long pause, then a sigh heavy with irritation. "Listen, pal, you're scaring people. We checked your route log. No Hollow Creek entry. Your bus tracker stopped transmitting at 11:46 p.m. We assumed equipment failure. Just take a few days off. Yeah. Get some sleep." Owen's throat tightened. "You don't understand. The road's still there. The bus is." But the line went dead. Static hummed for a moment, then a whisper. "Driver." Owen's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't the dispatcher's. It was Walter's. He threw the phone across the counter. It landed screen up, displaying the digital clock, 11:47 p.m., frozen, unmoving. By evening, the fog had returned, thicker than ever. It poured down the street in slow, rolling waves, devouring the lamplight. Even inside the house, Owen could smell it, earthy, metallic, old. He sat on the couch, coat still on, Scout pressed against his leg. The dog's ears twitched with every creak of the floorboards. Then the radio in the kitchen clicked on by itself. Hiss. Then faint music, distorted 1950s crooning, warped by static. Owen approached, pearls hammering. The dial flickered, turning without touch. He yanked the cord from the wall. The music didn't stop. Over the fading melody came a voice, clear and breathy. Final stop. Hollow creak. Something heavy struck the door. Once. Twice. Scout barked wildly. The knocks grew louder, urgent. Then a voice on the other side said quietly, "Owen." He froze. It was Clara, the depot clerk who had phoned him last week. She lived 3 streets away. "Owen?" she called again, muffled. "It's me. You left your route logs. Can I come in?" His instinct screamed no. He stepped closer. "Clara? How did you know where I live?" Silence. Then, faintly, the sound of metal scraping across wood. Not fingernails. Something sharper. Scout whined and backed away. Owen looked through the peephole. For a second, he saw only fog. Then a face leaned close, white skin, hollow eyes, lips blue and split like old porcelain. Clara's, but wrong. Her mouth opened wider than humanly possible, jaw cracking sideways, revealing the void beneath. "They rise from the trees," she hissed. Owen stumbled back, slamming the bolt shut. The door shuddered from a single, powerful hit. Then silence again. When he looked through the peephole once more, the porch was empty. Only fog twisting like smoke. He didn't remember leaving, only driving. The steering wheel cold beneath his hands, the road unspooling before him like a ribbon of grey silk. Scout sat in the passenger seat, whining softly. The fog was everywhere now, flowing through the vents, seeping into the dashboard seams. It had a taste, metallic and damp, like blood mixed with rainwater. The car's radio crackled back to life. "Next stop." He turned it off. The voice persisted, no longer from the speakers but from the air itself, from the rhythmic groan of the tires. Hollow creak. The GPS flickered awake on its own. The route line redrew itself, glowing faintly. A single destination appeared, Hollow Creek, 11:47 p.m. "No," Owen whispered. "No more." But the car was already slowing. The fog parted just enough to reveal the barricade. Beyond it, a narrow road waited, wet and black, framed by trees like an open mouth. Scout whimpered, pawing the dashboard. Owen gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. "We finish it," he said under his breath. Once and for all. The engine cut out halfway across the bridge. No warning, no sputter, just sudden silence. The headlights dimmed to faint yellow, barely enough to see the broken asphalt ahead. Owen opened the door, stepping into cold mist up to his knees. Every breath burned. The air pulsed faintly, as if the fog itself inhaled and exhaled. He walked forward, flashlight beam trembling. The trees closed around him, trunks slick and black. Then, a sound. Branches creaking. Leaves whispering, though there was no wind. From the darkness between the trees, figures began to emerge. Tall, thin, wrong. They moved with jerking grace, their limbs bending at strange angles. Their faces were smooth hollows, like masks carved from bark. Claws glinted faintly as they crawled from the roots, rising until they towered above him. Each step they took filled the air with a low groan, like wood under strain. Owen stumbled back, voice breaking. "What do you want?" A dozen heads tilted in perfect unison. From their throats came a sound, not words. But the echo of his own voice played backward, layered and distorted. Then one stepped forward, and in its shifting surface, he saw his reflection, distorted, trapped, mouthing something silently. "Driver," it breathed. Owen turned and ran. The fog swallowed everything. The car, the trees, the road. He ran until his lungs burned, the whispers chasing him, louder now, all repeating his name. Owen Baxter. Owen Baxter. Owen Baxter. He burst into a clearing, the same one as before. The bus stood waiting, impossibly intact. Its lights glowed dimly, door open as if inviting him. Scout barked once, sharp and panicked. Owen climbed aboard, slamming the door shut behind him. The interior smelled of damp soil and engine oil. The driver's seat was empty. The key sat in the ignition, turning slowly on its own. "Fine," he muttered, shaking. "You want me to drive?" He sat, gripping the wheel. The gauges flickered to life. The radio hummed. Next stop, Hollow Creek. The bus lurched forward on its own, rolling through fog so dense it erased the world. He couldn't see where it was going. Only faint shapes pressing against the windows, faces smeared across the glass. Every so often, a voice would whisper from behind him, close to his ear. "You stopped when you shouldn't have. You looked when you were told not to. You belong to the road now." He wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. His hands were no longer his. They moved automatically, turning the wheel, shifting gears, driving through eternity. The radio crackled once more. Walter's voice, calm now. "You drive until they forget your name." Owen's eyes filled with tears. "Please, I want to go home." A long silence. Then, faintly, "You already are." When the rescue team found the bus 2 days later, it was empty. Engine cold. Windows open. No sign of the driver. Only one thing stood out. The clock above the windshield was frozen at 11:47 p.m. And written on the dashboard, carved deep into the metal, were the words, "They rise from the trees." In York, sometimes the late-night bus drivers tell a story. They say if you drive north past the moors in heavy fog, a second bus might appear ahead, identical, taillights flickering through the mist. If you follow it, you'll see a shadow at the wheel. A man with hollow eyes, forever driving toward a stop that doesn't exist. Dash 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 dash. Story 4. The Quarry's Blood Ritual. Part 1. The Lost Voice. The message came just after midnight. Lauren Holt woke to the faint chime of her phone vibrating on the nightstand and the soft hiss of rain against her window. For a moment she lay there, blinking at the glow of the screen, expecting another work email. Something dull, something normal. But the name stopped her breath. Ivy. Her sister's name, though Ivy Holt had been missing for 12 days. Lauren sat up, heart drumming. The text preview read only. Found it. The carving. She opened it with shaking hands. The message timestamp was from 11:47 p.m., an hour before. Attached was a single image. A stone surface covered in moss and rain, carved with a circle of jagged symbols and a line of faint red staining the cracks. At the bottom of the frame, half visible, were the worn soles of Ivy's boots. Lauren whispered, "Oh God." The photo had no GPS data, no coordinates. She called the number immediately, pressing the phone to her ear until the static made her skin crawl. No answer. Just wind. And underneath it, faint and deliberate, someone breathing. By morning, the police still hadn't called back. They'd given up pretending, really, treating Ivy as another hiker lost on the moors, a statistic waiting for closure. Lauren couldn't accept that. Her sister didn't wander without telling her. They'd been each other's constants since childhood, two halves of the same stew bonus. She packed a duffel with water, torch, and a map of Hawortha's hills. She told no one she was leaving. The world could keep its sympathy. She needed the truth. The moors were grey and endless, the kind of cold that lived in your teeth. The heather brushed her legs as she walked, whispering against the wind. For hours, she saw nothing but rolling fog and the occasional caw of a crow. But around noon, she found the quarry. It wasn't marked on the map, just a jagged scar in the earth, Steep walls slick with rain, rust-colored water pooling at the bottom. The place felt wrong. Not just deserted, but expectant, as though it had been holding its breath for her arrival. She climbed down carefully, boots slipping on wet stone. The air grew heavier with each step. When she reached the basin, she saw it, the carving from Ivy's photo. It was etched into the rock face, waist high, a circle of primitive symbols surrounding a shape like an open eye. Dried streaks of something darker than rust traced its edges. Lauren crouched, brushing the stone with her fingers. The surface was warm. A whisper escaped her lips. "What the hell did you find, Ivy?" The wind rose, carrying a faint echo. It sounded almost like a voice. Lauren froze, scanning the ridges above. "Hello?" No response. Only the steady drip of water from the cliff edge. Then, again, clearer this time, a woman's voice. Distant. Familiar. "Lauren." She spun around, the torch beam slicing through mist. The quarry was empty. The voice came again, echoing strangely, as if from beneath the ground. "Lauren. Don't stay." Her stomach turned to ice. It was Ivy's voice. Lauren shouted, "Where are you?" No reply. Only that slow, rhythmic dripping, like a heartbeat counting down. Then she saw it. Carved beneath the circle, half buried in mud, was something new, another line of symbols, still wet, as if freshly cut. And beside it, words in English, carved in deep letters that hadn't been there in Ivy's photo. She shouldn't have looked. A noise behind her. Soft. Wet. Like footsteps on moss. Lauren whirled. No one there. But she saw, high on the cliff edge, a figure standing in the mist, tall, cloaked, motionless. Watching her. Her pulse hammered. "Hey, who are you?" The figure didn't move. She blinked, and it was gone. Panic prickled her skin. She scrambled up the rock face, slipping on slick moss. By the time she reached the top, her knees were raw and her lungs burned. The moor stretched around her, empty as a dream. Only one thing lay near the edge, a small wooden box, half buried in heather. It was old, bound with black cord, the lid engraved with the same circle of symbols as the carving. She hesitated, heart pounding, then opened it. Inside lay Ivy's silver locket, and a Polaroid photograph, faded, water-stained, edges curling. 4 people stood near the same quarry wall, smiling stiffly for the camera. The photo looked decades old. Someone had scrawled in pen across the bottom. "Stay away." Lauren's fingers trembled. The handwriting was Ivy's. She turned the photo over. On the back, in smaller, messier writing, "He's still here." A shadow moved at the tree line. Lauren snapped her head up. A man stood among the birches, half hidden by fog. His face was obscured by a hood, but she could feel his eyes on her. Her instinct screamed run. She shoved the photo into her pocket and bolted toward the ridge. Behind her, branches snapped, footsteps matching hers, slow but relentless. She risked a glance back. The figure was following. "Hey," she shouted. "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. He was close now, close enough that she could hear the drag of his boots through wet grass. Lauren broke into a sprint, lungs tearing. The hill crested, revealing her car parked on the narrow road below. She nearly slipped down the last slope, gravel scattering. She yanked the door open, threw the bag inside, and slammed it shut. Her hand shook so badly she fumbled the keys twice before the engine finally roared. In the mirror, the hooded man stood at the ridge, perfectly still. Then, he lifted his hand. Something glinted between his fingers. A knife. He pointed it toward her, slow and deliberate, like a curse. Lauren slammed her foot on the accelerator. The car fishtailed down the narrow road, mist closing in around her. Her heartbeat was a drum, her breath coming in sharp bursts. When she dared to look in the mirror again, the ridge was empty. She didn't stop driving until she reached the edge of Haworth, where lights from old stone houses cut through the fog. Her hands were bloodied from the climb. She hadn't even noticed. At a petrol station, she parked under the fluorescent lights and tried to breathe. The world felt unreal, like she hadn't fully escaped the quarry. She opened the glove compartment to grab tissues and froze. Something small and wooden sat inside. The same box. The lid was open. The locket was gone. In its place was a new Polaroid. It showed the quarry again. Only this time, there were 5 figures standing in the circle. Lauren's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered on instinct. Ivy. A man's voice replied. Calm. Deep. She saw the marks. That means she's part of it. Lauren's throat closed. Who is this? Where's my sister? The man chuckled softly, like someone humoring a child. She's with the others. Then the line clicked dead. The phone screen flickered once before the camera app opened by itself. The viewfinder showed her reflection, pale, shaking, eyes wide. Then, for half a second, a shape appeared over her shoulder. A hooded figure, smiling. Partook the blood circle. Lauren didn't sleep that night. She sat in her flat's dim kitchen, the blinds drawn tight against the mist. The clock ticked loud and slow, every sound magnified. The Polaroid lay on the table between her trembling hands. 5 figures stood at the quarry's base. One of them, one unmistakably her, was staring straight into the camera. She'd never been there with anyone else. Never posed. And yet there she was, pale and still, caught in a moment that hadn't yet happened. It wasn't possible. And yet, it was there. Her reflection in the window trembled slightly, not from her movement but from something unseen, a faint flicker of shadow just behind her shoulder. She turned quickly, but the flat was empty. The silence pressed in, heavy as the fog that blanketed her worth outside. By dawn, she was on the road again. The local police had dismissed her late-night call as stress, advising sleep and perspective. She didn't bother arguing. They'd already written Ivy off. But someone in town knew something. The photo had shown 4 others long before her. People connected somehow, maybe part of the same disappearance Ivy had stumbled into. Lauren's first stop was the Haworth Historical Society, tucked between a bakery and an antique shop. The building smelled of dust and tea leaves, its wooden floors creaking beneath her boots. A bespectacled man at the counter, mid-60s, cautious smile, looked up as she entered. Morning. You look half-frozen. Love. Can I help you? I'm looking for records on an old quarry, Lauren said. Just outside the moors. Might have closed before the 90s. The man frowned. That would be Bleak Quarry, maybe? Been shut since the 70s. Nasty business there. Her pulse quickened. What kind of business? He hesitated, lowering his voice. Disappearances. Miners first, then travelers. Police said unstable ground, but folks stopped asking questions. Lauren leaned forward. Do you have photos? Names. He led her to a back room filled with newspaper clippings under glass. Dust motes drifted in the light. The man pointed to a faded front page dated 17th August, 1993. Local youths vanish near quarry. Ritual symbols found at site. Below the headline, the photo. 4 people smiling stiffly in front of the quarry wall. The exact Polaroid from the box. Lauren's stomach dropped. You've seen this, she whispered. He shook his head. We never got copies. Police sealed the files after that. No bodies found. But people say it wasn't an accident. Who took the picture? His eyes flicked toward the door before answering. Some said a cult operated out there. Old pagan types, worshippers of something called the sleeper beneath. But I'd keep that to myself, miss. Lauren folded the article carefully, hands trembling. As she turned to leave, the man added softly, if you found something out there, burn it. Don't bring it home. The fog thickened by afternoon. Driving felt like wading through smoke. Lauren parked outside the King's Head, the only pub still open in town, its windows glowing umber through the gloom. Inside, a few locals nursed pines, their eyes following her as she entered. Conversations faltered. She approached the bar. The bartender, a wiry man in a wool cap, polished a glass without looking up. Looking for someone, he asked flatly. Information, Lauren said. About Bleak Quarry. He froze, then glanced up sharply. You shouldn't be saying that name here. I don't have a choice. She slid the photo across the counter, the one from the box. Recognize anyone? He stared for a long time, jaw tight. Where would you get this? My sister disappeared there. Last week. The man's face hardened. Then you should leave town. Lauren's voice rose. You know something, don't you? What happened to those people? He looked around the bar. Everyone was silent now, watching. Then he leaned in close, his breath heavy with whiskey. Listen carefully. Every 30 years, someone finds that place. Always the same circle carved in stone. Always the same marks. It chooses them. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Lauren's throat tightened. It. The thing beneath. The one they used to feed. A shiver rippled down her back. He continued, voice low. They say the quarry was a mine once, before it opened into a cavern. The old miners found bones. Human ones, massive as trees. That's when they started the rites. A trade. Blood for silence. She wanted to dismiss it. Superstitious nonsense. But the tremor in his voice made that impossible. What happens if someone breaks the ritual? She asked. He stared at her for a long time. Then, quietly, it comes for them. And for everyone who tries to help. Lauren left the pub trembling. The air outside felt thicker, suffocating. The fog swirled unnaturally, as if shifting in response to her heartbeat. Her phone buzzed again. A new text. No number. You shouldn't have gone there. Her chest tightened. She texted back instantly. Who is this? No reply. Another buzz. This time, a photo. Taken from behind her car. Her silhouette barely visible through the mist. Someone was watching. She spun in a full circle, scanning the empty street. The fog swallowed everything beyond a few feet. Her voice cracked. Show yourself. Nothing. But as she fumbled for her keys, a faint sound came from across the road, a low hum, rhythmic, like chanting carried by the wind. She froze. It was coming from the direction of the moors. Against every instinct, she followed it. The sound drew her up the hill, past the last cottages and into open ground. The moor spread out in waves of grey and black, moonlight catching on slick stones. The chant grew louder, words indistinct but steady, pulsing in unison like a heartbeat. And then she saw the lights, dim orange glows circling the quarry. Torches. Lauren crouched behind a boulder, breath shallow. There were figures, 6, maybe 7, standing in a ring around the carved symbol. Cloaked, hoods drawn. One held a lantern over something on the ground. A shape, small, human. Her stomach lurched. She couldn't move, couldn't blink. The leader raised a dagger above his head, the metal catching torchlight. The chanting stopped. A single phrase echoed through the quarry, deep and resonant. Blood answers blood. The dagger came down. Lauren clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. She stumbled backward, knocking loose a rock that tumbled noisily down the slope. The cloaked head snapped toward her in unison. The lantern's light swept across the ridge, catching her face for a single, frozen instant. And the leader smiled. She ran. Branches whipped at her arms, mud slicked beneath her boots. Behind her, voices shouted, heavy footsteps giving chase. The torches were gaining, orange flares cutting through mist. She tripped once, twice, the ground sliding out from under her. But adrenaline forced her up. Her lungs burned as she burst onto the road, fumbling for her keys. The car door wouldn't open. She screamed in frustration, yanking the handle until it gave way. Something slammed into the back window. A torch. It shattered, flames licking the frame. Lauren dove inside, started the engine, and sped off, tires spinning gravel into fire. In the rearview mirror, The figures faded into the fog. But the chanting lingered. Even after she reached down. Even after she locked herself inside her flat and collapsed onto the floor. It echoed faintly from the walls, whispering in a voice she knew too well. Ivy's voice. Blood answers blood. Part 3, The Offering. The chanting didn't stop that night. Even after she pressed her palms over her ears, even after she turned on every light in her flat, it droned faintly, seeping from somewhere deep in the walls. When she finally fell asleep near dawn, she dreamt of water rising in the quarry, dark and viscous, rippling with something just beneath the surface. When she woke, her phone was ringing. The caller ID read, Ivy. Lauren froze. The screen flickered. The call ended before she could answer. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Ivy had been gone for over a week. Her phone had been found shattered near the quarry's edge. The device buzzed again, a voicemail notification. Heart hammering, Lauren pressed play. Static hissed for several seconds, then a faint voice, barely human, came through. Lauren, you shouldn't have come back. A pause. Then, in a whisper. They know your name now. The message cut off. By afternoon, Lauren's fear had hardened into resolve. She couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows, checking every corner for figures that never appeared. If Ivy was dead, she deserved truth. If she wasn't, if some cult had her, Lauren wasn't going to wait for police to shrug it off again. She gathered her flashlight, her sister's old pendant, and the article she'd taken from the Historical Society. Her stomach churned as she packed. It felt like walking toward a noose she couldn't see. When she stepped outside, the world was wrapped in mist once more. The moor seemed to exhale it, each gust colder than the last. The car engine sputtered reluctantly to life. Lauren drove without music, headlights slicing through the fog. Each mile toward the quarry thickened her dread, yet there was a grim inevitability to it, as if the road had been waiting for her all along. When the town fell behind, her phone lost signal. The last sign she passed was half buried in weeds. Bleak Quarry closed since 1976. Trespassers will be prosecuted. The gate hung open. The same torches she'd seen the night before lay scattered, cold and burnt out. Lauren parked, leaving the car door ajar in case she needed to run. The air carried a sour, metallic scent. Fog wove around the stones like breath. As she descended the path, she felt the faintest vibration underfoot. Not a sound exactly, more like a pulse, steady and subterranean. She reached the base. The carved circle still gleamed faintly on the quarry floor, slick with something dark. Blood. Lauren swallowed hard. The stench was unmistakable, iron and rot. The chanting had stopped. But the silence here felt louder than any sound. She swept her flashlight across the walls, revealing dozens of symbols scratched into stone. Spirals, triangles, runes, each one smeared with old rust-colored stains. Some had names carved beneath them. And then she saw hers. Lauren Holt. Freshly etched, the letters wet with crimson. Her knees buckled. No, she whispered. No, this isn't. A whisper slithered from behind her. You came back, just like she did. Lauren spun. A figure stood by the rock face. A man in a tattered cloak, hood drawn low. Beneath the hood, only his mouth was visible, grinning through cracked lips. Ivy wanted to leave, he rasped. But once you see it, it marks you. You both belong to the circle now. Her flashlight trembled in her grip. Where is she? He tilted his head. Below? He pointed toward a fissure in the stone wall, narrow but deep. An opening she hadn't noticed before. Lauren took a step closer, her body moving despite the dread clawing her insides. The air from the fissure was freezing, carrying a faint sound like water dripping far below. Ivy called for you, the man said. She offered herself. The circle accepted. But it always demands to. Lauren's voice broke. You killed her? His smile widened. No. We only opened the door. The sleeper took what was owed. He raised his hand. It was slick with blood. Something moved behind him, shadows slithering along the walls, bending in ways light shouldn't allow. A faint ripple in the fog, almost liquid. Lauren stumbled backward. The figure reached out, his voice echoing strangely, as though layered with others. Finish the offering, and the circle closes. Refuse, and it comes for everyone you love. Then, he vanished. Not faded, not ran, simply wasn't there anymore. The air rushed inward to fill the space he'd occupied. Lauren stood alone, the quarry floor pulsing faintly beneath her boots. She wanted to flee, but the thought of Ivy, her voice on the voicemail, her name carved into stone, rooted her to the spot. The fissure called to her. A low hum vibrated through the ground. Against her will, she crouched beside it, peering into the darkness. Something gleamed below, a flicker of silver. Ivy's locket. Lauren reached down. The air from the fissure was cold enough to sting. Her fingers brushed the edge of the pendant, slick with moisture. When she pulled it free, her flashlight flickered violently. And then she saw it. A face, her sister's, half-decayed, drifting in the blackness below. Her mouth opened, whispering without sound. Lauren screamed and stumbled back, dropping the locket. The ground trembled. Cracks spidered across the quarry floor, the circle glowing red from within. A sound rose, wet, gurgling, ancient. From the fissure, something began to emerge. Not a creature in any recognizable form. More a mass of limbs and faces fused together, skin grey and slick like clay. The carved runes burned brighter as it crawled upward, dragging itself by ruined hands. Dozens of mouths opened at once, each mouthing the same word. Blood. Lauren ran. She sprinted up the slope, lungs searing, the fog swirling violently around her. Behind her, the thing screamed, a sound that rattled the marrow in her bones. The ground split open, torches flaring to life one by one, as if mocking her flight. When she reached her car, her fingers slipped on the handle. The engine stuttered, coughed, then roared. She didn't look back. Not until she hit the main road. Only then did she see the figure standing in her headlights, a silhouette of a woman, pale and still. Ivy. Lauren slammed the brakes. The car skidded sideways. When the dust settled, the figure was gone. But something glimmered on the road ahead, metallic, small. The locket. It lay open. Inside was a photo of Lauren. Her face scratched out. By the next morning, the police found her car abandoned by the roadside, engine running, doors open. The seat was empty except for a Polaroid strip. 5 frames this time. The last one showed Lauren standing at the quarry, her hand reaching toward the camera. Behind her, the carved circle glowed faintly. The booth was never there, of course. Not this time. But the photo spread anyway, online, in news reports, whispered in pubs. People swore the fog thickened when they looked at it too long, that faint voices murmured from the edges of the frame. The quarry was sealed by officials, though no one could say who requested it. And some nights, when the fog rolls in heavy from the moors, locals hear chanting carried on the wind, low, rhythmic, the same words over and over. Blood answers blood. Dash 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 dash. Story 5. The Death Ledger. Part 1. The Marking. The bell had stopped working months ago, so when the janitor died, no one noticed right away. At least, not until the smell reached the stairwell. It was a Tuesday morning, late autumn, when Henna Blake unlocked her classroom door at Whitfield Comprehensive, balancing coffee, a tote bag of essays, and the exhaustion of another week spent holding together 30 restless teenagers. She'd been halfway through grading when a police officer appeared in the doorway, his boots squeaking faintly on the linoleum. Miss Blake, I'm sorry to bother you, but we're doing a welfare check for Roy Carver. You haven't seen him, have you? Henna frowned. Not since last week. He fixed the heating in the hall on Friday. The officer nodded, hesitated, then said quietly, we found him in the supply cellar this morning. Something in his tone, a softness meant to cushion horror, made her stomach twist. That afternoon, classes were cancelled. Staff gathered in the break room, whispering in the low, reverent voices people use when death is still fresh enough to make them feel fragile. Roy had been a fixture of the school for decades, a wiry man in his 60s with nicotine-stained fingers, a permanent limp, and a fondness for humming old tunes as he pushed his cleaning trolley down the halls. No family, no friends anyone could name. He had simply existed on the periphery, harmless, overlooked, indispensable. Henna stayed long after the others left, sitting at her desk in the empty classroom, staring at the fog gathering outside the window. It was almost 6 p.m. when she realized someone had slipped something under her door. A notebook. Plain black cover, no label. Old, but well-kept, the kind of thing someone would carry in a breast pocket for years. She crouched and picked it up. The initials RC were embossed faintly on the back. Roy, she murmured. Inside, the pages were lined and numbered, the handwriting neat but shaky. Each page listed a name, followed by a date. Dozens of them. Her eyes skimmed down the first few entries. Eleanor Shaw, a 3rd April, 2019. Daniel Hodge, 21st June, 2020. Linda Price, 12th November, 2020. Then, halfway down the page, she froze. Henna Blake, 15th November, 2022. That was 3 days from now. She closed the notebook so fast it bent the cover. A prickle ran down her spine. It was a sick joke, she told herself. Maybe Roy kept a list of staff birthdays, and someone had added her name as a prank. Or perhaps the dates were random. But the names above hers, she recognized 2 of them. Both former teachers. Both dead. She flipped through more pages. Every name she recognized, former students, retired staff, had one thing in common. They were all gone. By the time she reached the last page, her pulse was hammering. The most recent entry was dated the day before Roy's death. The line below it was blank. She dropped the notebook into her tote and left without locking her door. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of coincidence frayed the longer she stared at the ceiling. Roy had been quiet, yes, but not cruel, not delusional. He'd kept to himself, always polite, always muttering apologies if he bumped someone's chair. Why would he keep a list like that? And why her? The thought of her own name scrawled neatly in that old man's hand kept replaying in her head. How careful the letters were, how final they looked. When she finally drifted into sleep, she dreamt of chalkboards and corridors washed in fluorescent light. A janitor's cart squeaked in the distance. A voice, dry, whispering, papery, called her name. When she turned, there was no one there. Only a notebook lying open on the floor, pages fluttering despite the still air. Each page turned itself faster and faster, until she saw it, her name, written again and again, filling the margins, bleeding into the paper. Then came a gunshot. She woke gasping. The next morning, Henna arrived early. The air smelled faintly of bleach, the kind the custodians used after a death. Students avoided the cellar now. The staff avoided talking about it. At her desk, the notebook waited where she'd left it, heavy and cold. She flipped it open. The ink on her name was darker than before. It looked fresh. Her breath caught. No one else had been in her classroom. She locked it every night. She touched the page. Her fingertip came away smudged with black. The intercom crackled, making her jump. "Miss Blake, could you come to the office, please?" The voice was calm, but her nerves were shot. When she arrived, the secretary looked pale. "We just had a call about you." "What kind of call?" "They didn't say. Just to tell you to be careful on the 15th. Henna felt the room tilt. "Who was it?" "No number." It sounded like... The secretary hesitated. Like an older man. The days crept by, thick with unease. On the 14th, she went to the police. She told them about the notebook, the list of names, the call. The officer listened politely, took notes, and promised to look into it. She could tell from his expression he didn't believe a word. That night, she poured herself a glass of wine, trying to write lesson plans, trying not to check the clock. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Roy never missed a date. Her hands went cold. Another message followed. "You're next, Henna." She dropped the phone, heart pounding. When she picked it up again, the messages were gone. The screen was blank. She told herself it was a prank, students, maybe, but the shadows in her flat stretched long and sharp. The ticking of the wall clock sounded too loud. Somewhere outside, a car engine idled, then went silent. She stood by the window for a long time, staring into the street, until her reflection in the glass seemed to shift slightly out of sync. That's when she realized the outline behind her wasn't hers. She turned, breath frozen. Nothing. Only the hum of the refrigerator. But when she looked back at the window, the shape was gone too. At school the next day, the 15th, the sky was bruised and heavy with rain. Henna tried to act normal, greeting students, collecting essays, forcing herself to laugh at a joke she didn't hear. But her mind kept flicking back to the notebook. At lunchtime, she finally opened it again. The ink beside her name glistened faintly. Beneath it, a new entry had appeared. Roy Carver, 14th November, 2022. The day before. Her stomach dropped. For a long moment, she just stared at the page, trying to breathe. A sound drew her attention, a faint tap against the window. She turned. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the view of the courtyard. Then, through the drizzle, she saw it. A red dot. A perfect, unwavering circle of light resting dead center on her chest. Henna froze. The dot trembled slightly, as if from a hand steadying a scope. Then it moved, slowly, up to her face. She dropped to the floor. The glass shattered a split second later. Screams erupted from the hall. Henna crawled beneath her desk, heart slamming so hard she thought it might burst. Outside, footsteps pounded across the courtyard, fading fast. Police sirens wailed in the distance before fading into the rain. When it was over, they found the bullet lodged in the far wall. The angle suggested a rooftop across the street. No suspect, no witnesses. And the notebook? Gone. That night, Henna didn't go home. She stayed in a hotel under a false name, curtains drawn tight. Every creak of the building made her flinch. She dreamt again of Roy sitting at her desk, writing in the notebook. He looked up and smiled. "Don't worry," he said softly. "It's already written." He turned the page, and her name was gone. In its place, a new one appeared. Evelyn Cross, 16th November, 2022. She woke up crying. When morning came, the news blared headlines about a hit-and-run on the F-59. The victim's name made her blood run cold. Evelyn Cross, her closest friend, had been killed at dawn. Part 2, The Sniper's Oath. Henna didn't attend Evelyn's funeral. She told herself it was because of the police. Because they'd warned her to keep her profile low. Because they couldn't rule out that she might still be a target. But the truth was simpler. She couldn't look at another coffin without imagining her own name engraved on the plaque. Instead, she sat in a rented flat 40 miles away, the curtains drawn against the late November drizzle, watching the news through her fingers. The reporter spoke in the same sterile calm that always follows tragedy. A beloved local teacher killed instantly. Driver fled the scene. Police are searching for witnesses. Henna muted the TV. The silence was worse. On the coffee table sat her laptop, still open to the school's email portal. Messages blinked unread, condolences, staff updates, a request for a brief statement. She closed it. The notebook hadn't resurfaced. Not at the scene, not in evidence, not in lost property. The police said there was no record of it being logged, despite the detective's notes from her initial report. It had simply vanished. She tried to believe that meant it was over. But sometimes, in the late hours when the pipes hissed and the city traffic thinged, She could almost hear it, the soft rustle of turning pages somewhere in the dark. The nightmares followed her. She dreamt of empty hallways and flickering lights, of the smell of chalk dust and old paper, of Roy standing at the end of the corridor, his head tilted slightly, the notebook clasped to his chest. "You escaped your date," he'd whisper, eyes bright and pitying. "But someone has to take your place." When she woke, she'd find her bedside lamp flicked off, though she always left it on. Once, she thought she heard a camera shutter in the room. She stopped sleeping after that. Weeks passed. The police investigation yielded nothing. No CCTV. No prints. The bullet retrieved from her classroom wall had been clean. No rifling marks. No traceable weapon. Detective Meher, a graying man with sunken eyes, visited her twice. "We can't prove a link between the sniper and Carver," he'd said, folding his hands carefully on her kitchen table. "But your description of the notebook, that kind of fixation suggests someone orchestrated this before his death. Do you have any enemies, Miss Blake?" "Enemies?" She'd laughed hollowly. "I teach English. My biggest feud is with the photocopier." Meher smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed serious. "If you think of anything, anyone who might hold a grudge, you call me. Day or night." After he left, she realized the pen he'd used to jot notes was still on the table. A cheap black ballpoint. The same kind Roy had used to write in his ledger. It was around then the emails began. They came from no address. Just undelivered. Subject lines blank. But each one contained a single image. The first was a close-up of her apartment window, curtains half open, her silhouette visible in the lamplight. The second was her reflection in the supermarket freezer door, blurred by condensation. The third was her classroom from months ago, the one with the bullet hole, except in this photo, she wasn't there. Only the red laser dot, centered over her empty chair. She forwarded them to Detective Meher, but his reply was automatic. "Recipient not found." The police line went dead, too. She tried again the next day. The woman who answered said there was no Detective Meher in their records. No one by that name. By December, the snow had arrived, thin sheets clinging to the streetlights, turning the city into a grainy grayscale photograph. Hannah found herself watching people more closely. Delivery vans that idled too long. Strangers who lingered outside her building. She even noticed the postman, young, pale, with a lazy smile, slipping envelopes into her slot without looking up. One morning, she waited until he left, then tore open the letter. No stamp. Inside was a single scrap of lined paper, folded twice. In neat handwriting, the same tremor she remembered from the notebook, were 3 words. "You were spared." For the first time, Hannah considered leaving the country. She began searching flights, anywhere warm, anywhere that didn't have fog or ledgers or snippers or ghosts. She could start over, teach abroad, change her name, but her bank card declined at checkout. When she checked her account, a chill crawled up her spine. Her balance was 0. Every transaction had been drained, the withdrawals marked under a single description. Ledger fund. That night, she walked the city until her feet blistered. The snow melted into slush beneath her boots. Every shadow seemed to shift, every face in passing headlights blurred. By the time she reached the river, her phone was dead. The moon hung low and pale over the water, the surface broken by faint ripples. She sat on the embankment, numb, staring into the current. That's when she saw it. Something dark caught in the reeds below. A book. She knew it before she touched it. Black cover. No label. Damp from the water. Her initials were scrawled inside the front cover this time. HB. She dropped it instantly. But the pages had already started turning, slow and deliberate, as if stirred by a hidden hand. Her eyes locked on the newest entries. Evelyn Cross, 16th November, 2022. Hannah Blake, 17th December, 2022. Tomorrow's date. She slammed it shut and stumbled backward, heart racing. The wind picked up, carrying a faint echo, metallic, rhythmic. Gunfire. She looked up. Across the river, on the roof of an abandoned factory, stood a dark silhouette. A man. He held something long and glinting under the moon. Then, a flash. The sound followed a heartbeat later. A high, flat crack that tore through the night. Henna fell hard onto the embankment, the breath punched out of her lungs. For a moment she thought she'd been hit. But when she looked down, the bullet had missed, buried in the snow inches from her leg. She scrambled up, sprinting through the alleyways until her throat burned. Behind her, no footsteps. No shouts. Just the wind, and the faint, unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. She made it home before dawn. Every light in the flat was on. The front door, which she was certain she'd locked, stood slightly ajar. Inside, the air was wrong, too still, too cold. She moved carefully through each room, clutching a kitchen knife, whispering Scout's name before remembering her dog had died years ago. When she reached the bedroom, her breath caught. The notebook lay open on her pillow. A fresh entry bled across the page. Henna Blake, 17th December, 2022, shot through the heart. The handwriting wasn't Roy's this time. It was hers. At 7 a.m., neighbors reported hearing a single gunshot echo from the building. By the time police arrived, the flat was empty. No body, no weapon, only a shattered window and the notebook, its pages blank except for one new inscription on the final sheet. Ledger complete. Part 3, The Entity's Balance. The first thing Henna noticed was the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was dense, thick enough to feel. She stood barefoot in the middle of her flat, half expecting to hear sirens or her neighbor's television, but the world outside had gone mute. The air shimmered faintly, as if the city had been wrapped in glass. The clock on the wall had stopped. 7:03 a.m. Her reflection in the window didn't move. For a long time she just stared at it, at herself, at the unmoving fog beyond the glass, before whispering, "Am I dead?" Her reflection smiled a fraction of a second too late. The room was dim, colorless. Every surface looked desaturated, as if the world's saturation had been drained. Her phone showed no signal. The bulb flickered once, then steadied. And then she saw it, the notebook on the table. Closed this time. But breathing. Not literally, not with lungs. But the cover rose and fell in the faint rhythm of something alive beneath the leather. Henna backed away. No. A voice, soft, genderless, spoke from nowhere and everywhere at once. You wrote your own ending. She spun around. The air rippled near the doorway, coalescing into a vague silhouette, humanoid, though its features flickered like static. Who are you? It tilted its head, curious. The same thing he was. Roy. A sound, almost like laughter, dry and brittle. He was a keeper. You are the next. The figure stepped closer, its movements fluid and wrong, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. The wall seemed to breathe with it, expanding and contracting in sync with the notebook's pulse. You were chosen when you read the ledger, it said, its voice layered, many voices speaking as one, to balance the count. I didn't ask for this. No one does. The ledger chooses those who look too closely. It needs hands, eyes, ink. Henna's pulse thundered in her ears. You killed them. We record them. Her back hit the wall. You wrote my name. You wrote it. The entity corrected gently. The moment you feared it enough to imagine it, you gave it form. Fear is ink. Guilt is binding. The notebook snapped open. Pages fluttered violently, releasing gusts of cold air that smelled like rain and iron. On every page, names bled through the paper in faint grey script. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Some were crossed out. Others pulsed faintly, like heartbeats. Why me? She whispered. Because you survived your date. The ledger is a balance. One spared, one claimed. The words landed like stones in her gut. Evelyn. Her best friend. She died because of me. The entity's shape flickered again. Someone must replace the spared. Every omission is paid. Hannah's knees gave out. She sunk to the floor, trembling. Then take me. End it. A pause. Then the faintest hint of amusement in its tone. It doesn't end. Only transfers. The lights dimmed further until only the faint luminescence from the notebook lit the room. The pages turned again, faster now, until they stopped halfway through. Her name glowed faintly on the paper. Below it, a new blank line waited, as if expectant. Right? The voice commanded. She looked up. No. The air vibrated. A sound, deep, guttural, rolled through the apartment, making the walls shudder. The shape's face, if it could be called that, leaned closer, eyes like to pits of still water. Right? It repeated. Or someone else will take your place. Hannah stared at the blank line. The pen lay beside the book, identical to Roy's, cheap, blue, cracked near the clip. Her hands shook as she picked it up. I can't do this. You already have, the entity murmured. For a moment, she thought about fighting it, burning the notebook, defying whatever this cosmic bureaucracy of death demanded. But the memory of Evelyn's name on that page stopped her. The ledger didn't threaten. It balanced. If she didn't write, someone else would die in her place. Random. Innocent. Her throat tightened. It's not fair. The voice softened. Fairness is for the living. You are between. She thought of the students she'd taught, their faces flickering like old film reels in her mind. Of Roy, humming softly as he swept the corridors. Of Evelyn, laughing as they shared wine in the teacher's lounge. Her chest ached. I won't write anyone's name. The shadow stilled. Then the notebook moved on its own. The pen rose, hovering. The pages turned. It began to write for her. Detective Meher, 17th December, 2022. No. Hannah lunged forward, trying to grab it. But the ink spread fast, the letters etching themselves with furious precision. The pen dropped. The room went silent. Then, outside, a distant gunshot cracked the stillness. Hannah screamed. The entity watched her quietly. The balance holds, it said simply. You murdered him. He was already listed. You merely confirmed it. Tears blurred her vision. Why me? You know patterns, it said. You document, you grade, you catalog. You preserve order. That's what the ledger requires. Someone who understands consequence. I'm not your scribe, she whispered. But the thing only smiled. Everyone is, eventually. The silence stretched until Hannah realized something had changed. The light in the room had dimmed further, the world outside frozen mid-snowfall. The entity's outline flickered, dissolving like mist. When it spoke again, the voice came from everywhere, from the walls, the ceiling, from inside her own skull. You can leave this place, it said. Take the ledger. Continue the count. I won't. Then stay. The words echoed like a door closing. She woke in her flat again. Normal light, ticking clock, city sounds filtering through the window. For a moment, she thought it had been a nightmare. Until she saw the notebook lying neatly beside her on the bed. And her phone, buzzing with a new voicemail. She pressed play. A man's voice, calm and flat. Hannah Blake? This is Detective Meher. I'm calling from the station. There's been a shooting. Looks like suicide. You might want to come in. She dropped the phone. The date on the screen read 18th December, 2022. One day after the ledger's prediction. At the police station, Meher's desk was empty. A small pool of dried blood stained the floor. The officer at reception didn't meet her eyes. We found this, he said, holding out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a crumpled scrap of lined paper. Balance kept. Hannah drove until night fell. Until the motorway signs blurred past in streaks of white and yellow. She didn't know where she was going. Only that the ledger sat beside her on the passenger seat, vibrating faintly with each mile. She stopped at a service station outside Leeds. Snow fell softly, muting the hum of passing cars. In the restroom, she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The face looking back wasn't quite hers. Its mouth curved up first. Then, a half-second later, hers followed. She returned to the car. The notebook waited open on the dashboard, a new blank page shimmering faintly under the fluorescent lights. The pen rolled into her hand as if summoned. For a moment, she sat motionless, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. Then she wrote, "Unnamed per 18th December, 2022. She paused. The ink bled slowly, forming a second line beneath it. Henna Blake Keeper. The book exhaled, pages rippling outward like wings. The air in the car thickened, humming with unseen life. Somewhere far away, a gunshot echoed once more. Then silence. Weeks later, the flat she'd rented remained vacant. Police found no trace of her, only a burnt patch on the table where something had smoldered and gone cold. On the kitchen counter, amid the ash, sat a single object. A black notebook, closed but warm to the touch. Inside, one new entry. Roy Carver released.